Hey guys, and welcome to my tutorial series on ncurses. I intend this series to be a reboot of a series that I previously did. This time I will be going more in depth about the ncurses library while still keeping it easy to understand, hopefully. If you're unfamiliar with what ncurses is, these two websites that I've pulled up here do a really good job of explaining it, and I'll be loosely basing my tutorials off of information from both of these sources. So if you're done watching a tutorial and you want to get some more information, or whatever, both these sources are really good for supplementing these tutorials. But essentially, ncurses or curses is a library of routines that makes it easy to display characters on a variety of different terminals. Because certain terminals support some features while others don't, and because certain terminals implement the same features differently, the programmer must somehow handle these differences. Instead of having to learn how each terminal displays characters or colors, the programmer can actually just tell ncurses to do something and will figure out how to do that for the specific terminal it is run on. So instead of having to worry about how each terminal displays things, ncurses kind of handles all that for you. During these tutorials, I'll be using the C version of the ncurses library, which is one of the most well-known versions. However, there are other languages which also support ncurses. Off the top of my head, I know that Python has a version as well. A lot of the information you learn here will extend to that and other versions because the underlying library remains the same, with only minor differences in syntax of the language surrounding ncurses routines, essentially. This will by no means be a C tutorial. I will do my best to explain any code that I write, but I really recommend a background in either C or C++ before watching this tutorial. I'll also provide links below to sources which explain how to install ncurses on a variety of systems. I already have it installed, and I don't really want to go through that process because most of you know how to install things, I'm sure, so I'll just provide some links to that. I will not be showing how to install and use PD curses on Windows, as I've never had a lot of luck getting that to run properly or reliably. So I apologize to anyone running on Windows. You'll notice that I am working in Windows environment, but I'm actually SSHing into a Linux machine and running ncurses from there. So that's how I'm able to do this, even though I'm technically natively in a Windows environment. Also, as a quick note, I will often use the general word routine instead of function or macro, because the ncurses library contains a mixture of the two kinds of sequences of commands. I will try to make sure to indicate when a routine is a macro and not a function, particularly if it is important to that routine's implementation or really understanding how it works. But now that I have all that metadata about my tutorial series out of the way, let's actually get started and do some programming. So the first thing to do is to make a new C file, or the first thing that we'll do for this tutorial is to make a new C file that we can import ncurses into. So I'm just going to call this file hello.c. Now the astute in the audience might see where this is going, but I'll be using the Vim editor for these tutorials, but really any plain text editor will do. And the first order of business is going to be to include the curses library. Oops. Curses.h. And you may have noticed that instead of typing ncurses.h, the include is curses.h. I won't go too much into detail, but essentially, ncurses is an open source clone of the original curses library. Nowadays, the two are almost interchangeable, and you'll hear me refer to both. Essentially, though, either include will work. You could use either curses.h or ncurses.h. I've gotten in the habit of using curses.h, and the tutorials I referenced earlier also use curses.h, so that's why I'm more familiar with it, essentially. Now, ncurses is really nice and gives you a couple of includes for free, actually. So when you include curses.h, you also get stdio.h by itself. And then depending on what terminal you're running, it will also include term ios.h, or I'm just going to slash these here so I don't have to write include every time. Term io.h or sgtty.h. So depending on what terminal you're running in, it'll include whichever one of those is necessary. That isn't to say that because curses.h includes those, you can't include them yourself. It's just a nice convenience. So you don't have to include stdio.h if you don't want to. Now, just like all good C programs, we'll actually need a main function in order to run. So let's type that up now. Most people should be familiar with this, but if not, then it's okay. Just type it in. You don't really need to know that much about it, at least for this tutorial. Just know that it works, and without it, it won't work. So, But now that we have that foundation, we can actually begin using ncurses. Now ncurses has what I like to call routine wrappers, which are essentially two function calls which your ncurses code must be placed between in order to work properly. These two functions are called init screen and then endWin. So anything that's ncurses will be between these two routines essentially. Now the routine init screen up here, what it does is it performs two necessary functions, and anything that you do with an ncurses has to be done after this, otherwise you'll get an error. What it does is it collects information about the terminal characteristics, so it can accurately display the colors, characters, etc. And it also allocates space for two special variables called curScreen and standard screen. Now these two variables are of type window, which I'll type it out here just so you guys can see it. Window, which is an ncurses data type or structure which is used to describe the state of the terminal screen. It stores the starting positions on the screen and its size. And a window is like an internal representation of the screen that only the computer understands. Making changes to a window does not immediately make changes to the terminal screen though. It's something that's kind of stored in memory and then has to be refreshed in order to be displayed. Now curScreen represents what the current screen looks like, so like what the screen currently is looking like, what's currently on the screen, and it won't really be changed. You shouldn't screw with curScreen very much, but standard screen is what the screen should look like next, and it is the default window to write and make changes to. So between these two functions, init screen and endWin, we can perform ncurses routines. But before we do anything else or type any other things in between these, let's just run this and see what actually happens. So in order to compile a C file which includes ncurses, we need to link the ncurses library with the flag -lncurses. For the program I have created, we'll type out gcc -lncurses hello.c-o hello, and that'll compile fine. Now if we actually run that, or for this tutorial at least, I'll be compiling like this, but in the future I'll make a makefile, so it'll be a lot easier and faster to do. I don't have to type that out every time, but for this tutorial I'm just going to type it out like that. But now that we have that compiled, let's actually run it and see what happens. And you'll notice that nothing actually happens. I mean, something kind of happened, but really nothing actually happened. And this makes sense because essentially all we've done over here is we start the program, then we start curses, we end curses, and then we exit. So like nothing actually happens. Or if it did, we didn't see it because it ran so fast we couldn't see it. In order to actually be able to see some results, we're going to need to introduce a couple more routines. The first routine we're going to have to look at is getchar, spelled like this, which reads a single character from the standard screen. Now the official spec says that getchar may be implemented as a macro, so that's something to note. This routine's behavior can be configured through other routines, but for the scope of this tutorial we will just use the default configuration, which waits until the user presses a key and then returns the integer value of the character which was pressed. Essentially this function blocks the program from executing, which gives us as humans time to read what is displayed. For the purpose of this tutorial we won't capture the value, but if we wanted to we could say put it into a C or a char value or an int value. Either would work. And the second routine we have to add as well, I'll actually put it before getchar, is called refresh. Now what refresh does is it updates the visible window to match the contents of what are in the standard screen window. So as we gradually make changes to the standard screen, they don't get updated, but as soon as we run refresh, it takes what is in the standard screen and displays it on the window. The official spec also notes that refresh may be implemented as a macro, so that's something to note. So now if we type all this out and if we try to run this, say we compile it again, I'll actually type it out again, hello.c-o hello, and we run it, you'll see that we get absolutely nothing. And that's because I didn't save. That's my bad. So now that we've saved it, we can compile it and run it again. And we'll get, as you can see, a blank screen. So what happened here was init screen created the standard screen as an empty window. So when we refresh the screen here, it just displays an empty window because we haven't actually added anything to it yet. And then get char just waits for us to press a character, and as soon as we do that, it'll just exit and go back to the terminal. And as you see, it doesn't just empty the terminal, it saves what was there before and redisplays what was there before, essentially. Now that we can pause the program and see our changes, let's actually output something to the screen. Now, in order to do this, we're going to use a routine called printw, which takes a formatted string as its first argument. So we'll just type out printw, and we're going to do it. We're going to say hello world. Just as a side note, printw kind of works like printf, so if you're familiar with printf at all, you can do things like printw, and then type out, hello, I'm sorry, I'll capitalize that, grammar Nazi myself, hello, %s, exclamation, and then you can put in just a string and say Bob, and that'll put Bob where %s is. So very much like printf, except ncurses version. So now that we have that, let's save this, make sure it's saved and everything, and then we'll compile, no errors, which is good. We'll run it, and as you can see, top left corner up here, it printed out hello world, and then our cursor got left at the end, and I'll go into more depth about why that's the case in future tutorials. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. I guess I should also show you if I hit a character, it just exits out. That was me hitting a character. I don't know if you heard that. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this tutorial. In our next tutorial, we'll probably go into more depth about windows and how to move the cursor around the screen. But I hope this got whetted your appetite a bit for ncurses, and can't wait to see you in the next tutorial. Stay tuned.